And welcome back. This is our first segment of our show this morning, and we have been joined on set by attorney Kareem Musa. And as we mentioned prior to the commercial break, it's a discussion on the legal opinions involving the ongoing re-registration process. Good morning.
Good morning, Kareem. Good morning, Marlene, and thank you very much for having me on this morning.
Yeah. The re-registration process has been one that has been much talked about, not only in the political sphere, but also by the general public in terms of what ought to be done and the way in which it should be carried out.
Yes.
Now, the idea of having a legal opinion on this issue is rather interesting. Perhaps it was never thought of before that lawyers do have their way of viewing this particular situation. Let's begin first by getting your initial opinion or your position to what has been taking place in terms of people who are eligible to come in to vote going through the re-registration process.
Yes, well, as you know, we are governed by the Representation of the People Act, and in particular the two sections that everyone refers to, Section 5 and Section 9. Now, Section 5 of the Act really sets out who is eligible to register as a voter: anybody that is 18 years old and is a Belizean, or is a citizen of a Commonwealth country but has been residing in the country for at least 12 months. I think the one that has been under a lot of dispute lately, and one that affects the diaspora, is Section 5C, which relates to that you must be at that particular residence for 2 months. As you know, the diaspora voters, they come in maybe for Christmas, they come in for September celebrations, and so they are not here for any large amount of time. And so they are very concerned, and rightfully so, that they will not be able to register to vote. But this has always been the law. In 1997 was the last re-registration exercise. It was due up again 10 years later. That is what the law provides. So this has been prolonged for quite some time. It has been extended for 5 years and then an additional 5 years. And here we are some 20 years later. And so we have the re-registration exercise. We're now into the 4th week of re-registration. And I think from the statistics that I'm getting out of the Elections and Boundaries Office is that we're approaching 50,000 registered voters, when in fact prior to this exercise we had some 204,000 voters. Undoubtedly though, a lot of those voters have migrated, some have passed away, and so it's really a cleaning up of the voters list. But again, that particular section that requires that you be resident in that particular address for 2 months is one that is hotly debated on social media and Facebook, no?
Is it the opinion then that it disenfranchises those who are out in the diaspora who would otherwise be eligible to participate in a vote?
It certainly does. And I don't think that the intention of the law was to disenfranchise. It just so happens that they are collateral damage. Because what it seeks to do, what the law seeks to do, is to ensure that you are just not passing through a particular residence. For example, if you come into Caribbean Shores and you're renting an apartment for 1 month and then you leave a month later, you are not really established there. You're not permanently set in Caribbean Shores. And so I think the whole intention of the law was to ensure that you are there permanently. And I think they arrived at the 2-month period so as to ensure that that is satisfied. But by extension, it does affect the diaspora because, again, they're not here for any extended period of time.
Well, one of the things I think this highlights is why the re-registration process was important. Because we have people living in the diaspora who are accustomed to coming in for an election, participating, and then going back home without having spent an extended amount of time here. And so this practice has been allowed for the past 20 years. They were residents, I would assume, at the time when they first registered, and now it's ending a 2-decade-long practice. But the question really is, and we know that some members of the diaspora met with the Prime Minister as well, what is the definition of the resident specifically? So if I am living in any part of the United States or any other part of the world, and I say, you know what, I'll take some vacation time. I'll go to Belize for 2 months and I'll register. Is that still something that would be applicable under the law?
as you know, many diaspora citizens, they actually maintain residence in Belize. They actually have a home, a family home, so to speak. And so there's a distinction to be drawn between resident status, are you really living and working here, and domicile status. So I, as a member of parliament, I would be willing to support amending that legislation to change the word resident and to reflect that if you maintain domicile in Belize. And what does domicile mean? It means that you have a substantial connection to that country. Not necessarily that you're permanently there, but that you maintain that residence even though you are living and working abroad. And so, as you know, if you have traveled abroad, and I'm sure you have attended September celebrations in America, in the Caribbean, and I can tell you that those Belizeans that are abroad are some of the most patriotic people, some of the most nationalistic people, and you know, it would be regrettable to disenfranchise them because they have such a fond connection to Belize. And so I think it's important that as members of parliament, we look at changing the law to say not necessarily resident, but that you are domiciled, that you have a domicile in the country of Belize.
So that would be a distinction of whether or not I physically stay in the country for 2 months or I own property and an investment.
Or you have a home and that sort of thing, yes.
Now, it still seems to be, well, the Prime Minister said that he would be willing to look at legislation following this conversation with members of the diaspora. But it seems, from the public's perspective, that this isn't something that will perhaps change before
the next elections.
The referendum, at least.
Yes, not before the referendum. As you know, this re-registration exercise comes at the cusp of one of the most important decisions that our country is going to make less than a year away. And that's why I'm very surprised by the sluggish rate of re-registration taking place because we only have 1 month and a week left in re-registration. And so after that time expires, really and truly, if you're not on that voters list, there could be a snap general elections and we might only have 100,000 voters at the end of all of this. So I am appealing to those members of the public who have not gone out to re-register to definitely make time. It's only between 5 and 15 minutes max. And all you need to take in is your passport, your social security card and birth paper, and it really moves along very briskly, you know?
I have a question to ask, but it puts you in a very sticky situation for the simple fact that you are also a politician.
Yes.
My question is this particular exercise one where it is absolutely necessary for there to be a political machinery to move these voters in? Because we've seen situations, for instance, in Kaya last week where there was tension between the two parties. Similarly, we've heard rumors of incidents in Tamash where Guatemalans are supposedly being brought over to register.
Yes.
Is this something that requires political involvement at the partisan level?
I would say if I were to hazard a guess, it would be somewhere around 30 to 40% of the voters that go to re-register are actually brought in by politicians, whether it be UDP, PUP, or BPP, that actually facilitate, whether it be assisting in getting the birth paper for individuals. I think that's necessary because a lot of people don't have the time to go and stand up in a long line at Vital Statistics. So I think it's a good thing that you have politicians on both sides that are willing to assist in the process.
Are you, as an area representative, undertaking that?
Absolutely, absolutely. We try to go around to get a census as to who all live in the area, how many people of voting age are in the different households, and try to encourage them because really it is our civic duty to get out there and register. Now, a lot of misconception is out there about re-registration. A lot of people think they don't need to go and re-register. So it's just to educate and to inform them that this is a whole new exercise, and if you are not on that voters list, when the ICJ vote comes around, you will not be able to vote. A lot of people are saying, well, listen, I would vote no anyways to the ICJ, so I'm not going to re-register. But really and truly, you are only spiting yourself if you take that approach, because your vote will not be reflected.
Yeah.
It is only the percentage of voters that actually are registered, the yes and the no. There is no, oh, I didn't register voters. So they will not be reflected at all when the final tally is made on the ICJ vote. So again, this is a 160-year-old dispute with Guatemala, and it will be decided by our generation. So it's very important that we get on that voter roll to register.
It's interesting you said that, because I have found quite a few people who've spoken of not wanting to register because they don't want to participate in the referendum. And I feel that perhaps the message of just saying, listen, the slate is being wiped clean.
Yes.
There are no registered voters until you go into this process again.
Exactly.
So you're not on the list. Your voter ID currently is obsolete.
Yeah.
And you need to go back in and do the process over again. I want to touch, though, because the political machinery is something so important. And we really understate how important it is in how it comes together for elections.
Yes.
But it comes at a cost.
It does.
And we've not heard directly from any of the party representatives how involved they're going to be, whether they'll be putting in the finances to get this machinery going for both the re-registration exercise and also the referendum.
Yes. Well, I would have to say that right now, I can only speak for myself in Caribbean Shores. We are really working on what you would describe as a skeleton staff. You do need scrutineers inside the office. We're utilizing 6 scrutineers inside the office. You do need someone that goes out and does the surveys in the different areas. I have 4 different polling stations in my constituency. So we have small teams, again, another 6 individuals actually doing the groundwork. We try to do it as best as possible, as effective as possible, given the very limited resources that we do have to work with. The government doesn't give politicians, at least not the opposition, any resources in order to do this. And so we do have to rely heavily on donors from the private sector and otherwise. No?
Now, going back to the legal perspective on this matter, aside from what you've outlined or identified, is there anything else that perhaps the government is doing wrong in terms of the way it is carrying out this particular exercise?
Well, let me start off by saying this. I find it very concerning and very regrettable. Yes, both opposition parties, and I'm speaking the BPP and the PUP, have been clamoring for re-registration for quite some time now because it's long overdue. But I find it very concerning and regrettable that we have entered the re-registration process without getting the final recommendation, the final result from the Senate inquiry into the immigration scandal. Very concerning because if you recall, I think it was January of 2017, over a year ago, the director of immigration, Ms. Ruth Main, gave very revealing, eye-opening, shocking testimony in which she said some 2,000 plus Belizeans obtained their nationality irregularly and in many instances by fraud. And so their files were not complete. And so what I was hoping to see was a recommendation coming from the select inquiry before re-registration so that the government can deal with those 2,000 plus voters. Because once they obtain nationality, I'm sure you can recall, there was a particular minister giving out hand over fist nationality documents on the bonnet of his motor vehicle right before the elections, March 2012. And so it was my hope that we had an examination of those 2,000 plus voters and, if necessary, take away their nationality if they were irregularly obtained so that they do not make it on once again on the voters' roll, because part of this cleaning up process is not just to take off all the people that have passed on or those that have migrated, but those that do not deserve to vote. And if you are not supposed to be a Belizean, then naturally you're not supposed to vote in our elections.
Well, this brings us to the other hot topic, right? Looking at the issue of Guatemalans who have gained Belizean nationality. And it seems to be a very complicated matter, given our laws, given Guatemalans' laws, and given the current context of how the public feels of this specific issue heading into the referendum. What are your thoughts on whether or not Guatemalan nationals with Belizean nationality be allowed to register to vote?
Under our constitution, they should not be allowed to even obtain nationality, because our constitution at section 29 is very clear. If you happen to be a citizen of a country that does not recognize our independence, our sovereignty, and our territorial integrity, then you cannot become a Belizean. Of course, there is a proviso which has been abused and misused by politicians, because that section goes on to say that the minister, however, may in his discretion still grant nationality to these individuals. And that is a proviso that is very limited, though, because it says only pursuant to section 23 and 25. Not otherwise, in the way that it has been abused by politicians, and I would venture to say not just UDP, but PUP politicians as well. And so long as Guatemala has that law, I think it is in their constitution as well, that you are, once you are a born Guatemalan, you will die a born Guatemalan. You will forever maintain nationality. You cannot give it up. You cannot renounce your nationality. And so that conflicts with our section 29 completely.
But which law presides?
Our law has to preside.
Someone is in Belize, and the renunciation, which says I am no longer a Guatemalan national, it's a declaration, really, it has to be signed and all this stuff. It is not legitimate in Guatemala, but it's legitimate in Belize?
That's what I'm saying, that you are, because you are a Guatemalan, you do not give it up. So even though you may renounce it,
a catch-22 though?
It is somewhat a catch-22, but it is what is on our books. And like I said, the ministers over time have abused it, and they ought not to have been granting these nationalities only in specific situations should they have been doing so. And so there is this mounting discussion on it. And I know that there is a group that actually wants to take it to court. And I believe that they may very well be successful in their case in the Supreme Court. But again, that would then undo thousands upon thousands, not just the 2,000 we spoke of, but thousands, tens of thousands of nationality that have been granted over the years. And so I think we need to have two things. One, there needs to be a grandfather clause for those individuals who have obtained nationality regularly and legally. And moving forward, let us try to deal with this referendum, because then that would take away the fact that Guatemala has a claim against us. So we need to deal with that as well.
Isn't it the thinking, I know I've heard this somewhere before being discussed openly, but isn't it the thinking that perhaps it creates a situation where, for instance, if an individual is of Guatemalan heritage, and even if that person was born in Guatemala and becomes nationalized as a Belizean, the idea being that when that individual goes to the poll, he can very well take a position, he or she can very well take a position that is favorable to Guatemala, as opposed to doing the quote-unquote nationalistic thing and representing Belize's position on the matter.
That is no doubt a very huge fear of the Belizean populace, that Guatemalans will have a huge say in our referendum come April of 2019. But I have heard the flip side to that argument as well, that those Guatemalans who have come to Belize to seek a better life because they have been oppressed in Guatemala, and therefore they would never want Belize to become Guatemala, if you see what I'm saying. So they have adopted their Belizeanness over their being Guatemalan. So there is a flip side to that argument as well.
And that's what I wanted to touch on, because how do you not generalize the situation? There are Guatemalan nationals who are have been in Belize for many years, working within different productive sectors, and I feel sometimes that the conversation very much generalizes those who may have garnered their nationality in a way they shouldn't have. How do you keep that as a politician, as someone who works closely with other voters and speaks publicly? how do you make sure that there is not that hasty generalization made?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that we have the tendency to do so, and especially at a time like now that we are going into the referendum, highly sensitive issue across the board. We have some constituencies in the country that are represented by a member of the People's United Party, and those constituencies have 25–30% people who are Guatemalans who are now Belizeans. And so you have to be very careful not to make these sweeping generalizations, because that is a reality that we live in. We are a country, we are a melting pot of many different cultures, many different ethnicities. Guatemalans, Salvadorians, all of them come to Belize for a better life. So we have to be very careful, because many of those individuals, as you rightly said, are in fact Belizeans now, and they are on the voters' roll. So we have to be careful.
From a legal perspective, what we've heard the chief immigration officer say very clearly: if someone possesses the nationality certificate and they check out under their investigations, they will be registered, whether born in Guatemala or not.
Yes.
For those who perhaps have questionable origins for their nationality certificate, what can be done post the registration process?
I would venture to say not much, unless they are challenged in a court of law. Of course, the legislation, the ROPA, Representation of People Act, provides for different disqualifications in terms of your at Hattieville, you cannot vote because you're in jail, that sort of thing. So the questionable past thing doesn't really come into play unless you are in jail and you cannot vote. But once you have your nationality certificate, you are qualified to go on to the voters' roll. And that's why I said, for me, it's very concerning that we did not clean up and get a result from the Senate Special Inquiry, because there were so many questionable certificates issued.
And not just to Guatemalans.
No.
We got to be clear about that.
Wong Hong Kim could have voted in Belize, believe it or not.
That is very true.
If there was not that private prosecution by COLA, if there was not this huge uproar to revoke his nationality, he could have very well made it onto our voters' roll. And Nane Schnitzer, a lot of them, and these are only a few of them.
Now, this underscores the process of your own scrutineers, and you mentioned earlier that you're down to a skeleton staff. From what you've been seeing so far, do you see a number of challenges that will be brought forward on persons who have come to register so far?
I don't believe so. In Caribbean Shores, we are still under 1,000 registered voters. I think we are approaching 800. And I don't foresee that there will be much objections to those individuals. We have not only the elections and boundaries staff that are looking at these voters coming in, but you also have representatives, scrutineers from both political parties, the People's United Party and the United Democratic Party, who are in there and who are supposed to go along with the elections and boundaries officers when they do the spot checks at these homes to ensure that the people live there. So it's a very comprehensive process, and I do believe that there won't be much objections from either side. I don't foresee that.
Moving forward, and we are running out of time very quickly, but I want to touch on this issue. The referendum is quickly approaching.
Yes.
We're heading into a season where the distractions will be unlimited, from September celebrations, November 19th, Christmas, and before we know it, the referendum will be here. Have you taken an official position as to what you support in the vote for the at the referendum?
Well, it's very complicated, and you asked me a question that I can go on and on about, but let me start here by saying that my current position is that I, as a citizen of Belize, will not be bullied into voting yes. And why do I say that? If you listen to our foreign minister, he's calling people crazy if you say no to the ICJ. That is completely the wrong position to take. We hear members of the international community saying, if you vote no, then you run the risk that Guatemala will invade you. And so there's a lot of intimidating tactics, not only coming from our politicians, but from abroad, telling us that if you do not vote yes, then there will be repercussions. I do not want to engage in that type of intimidation, so don't come at me with that, because I will vote no. If you ask me whether or not we have a solid case at the ICJ, you know, I think the foreign minister once said, we run the risk of losing some maritime area. Again, that is scary because I am of the firm belief, like our predecessors, Mr. Price and Mr. Golson, that we should not give up a blade of grass. And so that is scary for me. Very scary, because in my opinion, 1981, we got our independence. It was recognized by all and sundry, except Guatemala, that we are a sovereign and independent nation. We have a treaty in 1859 that set out what our boundaries are. And so I do not adopt the position of the foreign minister that our borders are artificial. I take great offense to that. And so if you ask me, the current foreign minister has, for 10 long years, been saying and doing things to, in my opinion, inspire voters to say no, to vote no, really and truly. Whether it's saying that our borders are artificial, whether it's allowing the Guatemalan vessels to crash up on our reef and not charge them the millions of dollars that they should be charging them, whether it's the seeding of the Sarstoon, whether it's the Danikonarki issue and saying that, oh, I don't think it's Guatemalans that killed Danikonarki. He has not been standing up for Belize. And that is the reason why I say, even though he's saying vote yes, everything he does encourages voters to vote no. And so there has to be a standing up for Belize that has to take place by this administration or the future administration to let us feel a sense of confidence. Yes, the legal arguments look good, but we need to have that level of confidence restored in the Belizean population.
When I look at the situation, however, if I'm not mistaken, initially this was to have been an objective educational campaign,
Yes.
where it is up to you, the voter, to decide whether or not you believe that this matter should be taken before the ICJ for resolution. Somewhere along the line, it becomes now a pro-yes movement.
Yes.
I'm still hung up on that part of it
Yeah.
because I think the government's role is to present the information
Absolutely.
in as impartial a manner as possible.
Yeah.
That's my opinion, as opposed to saying, well, okay, we take this now and say, yes, we'll go ahead with this, and anything else is quote-unquote uncivilized, so to speak.
Crazy, to use his words, you are crazy if you vote no to the ICJ. And I agree with you fully, Isane, that we have to hear from both sides. I started reading, I haven't finished yet, Assad's latest book. I think all Belizeans need to purchase the book so that we can educate ourselves on the history, because that is where I get to say, this is really the position. I have to ignore what these politicians are saying, because if I listen to them, I may very well go crazy. So I need to educate myself. I need to go to different forums. And like you said, we need to hear from both sides of the divide, the yes and the no, and so that we can make an informed decision.
We had a town hall last week with some youth representatives, and one of the questions that was posed, and I think it is very important, people want to see a united political front on this issue, where in a very rare instance, we see something that has nothing to do with red or blue, but just all about the blue, red, and white, Belize.
Yes.
The opposition has not yet taken a firm position. They've not clearly stated what their involvement will be in this process. What is your perspective in how we can remove the political divide and focus solely on what's best for Belize moving forward, especially as we get into that important vote?
Yeah, I think the starting point for all members of parliament, for all caretakers, so to speak, is that we must be respectful of one another. I think that is what people want to see. No more name calling. You know, this is an issue that is bigger than all of us. This vote is so important to all of us. And so we need to, like you said, reach across the divide. I know the opposition has extended an arm saying we would want to be on the panel to along with the foreign minister to make policies and no doubt to establish a Sarstoon protocol. That is something that is very important to us in the opposition. We are not happy with the way the Sarstoon situation has been handled. So there are a lot of things that need to be set up first before we can have this united position. But I think moving ahead, we all need to just be respectful. And I think once we are respectful of one another and don't call each other names, I think we can come to one unified position.
My last question. When you are in a position to decide how you want to vote in the referendum or what you think is the best way forward, is that something that you foresee you will lobby for the voters in your constituents?
You know, I take the position that and it's the reverse, I understand, from the foreign minister's position. He says that in situations like these, the elected representative is to try to influence voters to vote a particular way. I think we are all capable, and especially in my division, to form our own opinions, and we don't need a politician to tell us how to vote. And so how I see myself going forward is to take the position of my constituents. When, after they have heard from both sides and made their informed decision, I will lobby what their position is, because I am sure they are going to get it right. And so I, as a leader, I'm also a follower of my constituents and what their position is. So if they're going to vote no, and they are saying that loud and clear, who am I to vote yes? Who am I to say, oh, just because I'm a lawyer, I happen to know the legal arguments are better? I have to understand their fears and their concerns moving forward to make such an important decision.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for coming in this morning and discussing quite a number of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the restoration work on St. John's Cathedral. So stay tuned.
We know that in today's